Ladies and gentlemen, ready? Okay. It's okay. The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time pursuant to Committee Rule 5 and House Rule 11, Clause 2. The chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote for the yeas and nays are recorded. A quorum, is there a quorum?
Yes.
A quorum being present, we will now proceed to today's business. Now, pursuant to notice, I call up the chair's resolution authorizing issuance of subpoenas related to child separation policy. The clerk will report the resolution, which was distributed in advance. Madam Clerk.
A resolution offered by Chairman Elijah E. Cummings authorizing issuance of subpoenas related to child separation policy.
Without objection, the resolution is considered read and open to amendment at any time. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. Copies of the amendment have already been distributed and are on the dais. The clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Chairman Elijah E. Cummings to the resolution authorizing issuance of subpoenas related to child separation policy.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read and will serve as the base text for purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Good morning. Today we are considering a resolution to authorize subpoenas to compel the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services to produce documents relating to the Trump administration's policy of separating immigrant children from their families. These subpoenas will be the first issued by the committee in the 116th Congress. I did not make this decision lightly. As many of you know, I have been passionate about this issue since it first became public last year, and I believe it is a true national emergency. With our government, when our own government rips vulnerable children, toddlers, and even infants from the arms of their mothers, and fathers with no plan to reunite them, that is government-sponsored child abuse. It is our job to step in and protect these children. As I often say, we're better than that. Further delay is not an option. Every day that these children are away from their children, and the children are away from their parents, causes damage. It is not the deed, it is the memory that will be seared in these children's DNA for the rest of their lives. 7 months ago, on July 5th, my good friend from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, agreed to join me in sending, and I applaud him for this, a bipartisan letter requesting information about these precious children, their parents, and their separation. As we wrote in our letter, we need this information to, quote, ensure that we can reunite children who have been separated from their families as expeditiously as possible. Although we received a briefing, we did not receive any of the information we requested. I wrote additional letters on August 2nd, another letter on September 17th, another letter on September 25th. When the agencies refused to produce the documents, I asked Chairman Gowdy to issue a subpoena. He declined. So after the election, I sent a letter to the agencies on December the 19th, explaining that now that I was going to be the chairman, I planned to continue this investigation. I directed them to produce these documents by January 11th. We received no substantive response. As a final attempt, on February 5th, I invited the top legislative affairs officials at each agency to testify about why they produced none of the requested information. I explained that if they provided a schedule to produce the requested documents, I'd postpone the hearing, trying to be reasonable. On February 8th, I postponed the hearing to accommodate their request for additional time. But unfortunately, even now, after more than 7 months, none of the agencies has committed to producing the information that we requested. Now, I have the authority under our rules to issue subpoenas by myself, but I told the ranking member, Jordan, that I would consult with him, and I have honored my commitment. Although none of the 3 previous Republican chairmen over the last 8 years allowed Democrats to vote on subpoenas, I'm allowing our entire committee to do that today. Although this was a bipartisan request from 7 months ago, Ranking Member Jordan wrote to me to express his objection to issuing these subpoenas. I read his letter over and over very carefully. But with all due respect to my good friend, I urge the ranking member and my Republican colleagues to reconsider their objections and support this resolution. Ranking Member Jordan's letter says the agencies have not had enough time to respond since the committee's most recent request was sent only 3 weeks ago on February 5th. But I urge my colleagues to remember the entire 7-month history of our efforts to obtain these documents, starting with a bipartisan request from Subcommittee Chairman Meadows and myself. I also remind my colleagues of the multiple letters I sent throughout the fall, as well as the letter I sent in December as incoming chairman. The ranking member's letter also says that the agencies are engaging in, quote, substantial good faith efforts to accommodate, end of quote, our requests. In fact, we just received some documents last night. The problem is that the documents that they sent to us do not answer any of the committee's questions. Instead, they produce a mix of publicly available court filings, redacted or aggregated data, and other non-responsive documents. These materials include no information that would allow us to track these separated children. The agencies have also offered other options, including in-camera review of certain information at agency offices. But these are not accommodations that the committee can accept, and the agencies have offered no legal rationale for their restrictions. Withholding this information frustrates and obstructs our efforts to help reunite these children with their families. Finally, the agencies have cited vague, quote, Privacy Act, end of quote, concerns as reason they have withheld information relating to separated children. Let me be clear. The Privacy Act does not apply to Congress. The committee has authority to receive this information, and the committee has regularly received sensitive financial information, health data, personnel records, and a wide range of classified information under the chairman of both parties. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a national emergency. This is a national emergency, and time is simply of the essence. And so I ask you to put partisanship aside and join us in obtaining these documents that were first requested in a bipartisan manner more than 7 months ago. Now I yield to the ranking member for his comments.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Before I go to our opening statement, I just had a question for the chairman. Committee rules say that we're supposed to get a testimony from a witness 48 hours prior to their appearing before the committee. And I understand historically we've been flexible with that on both sides, and I can appreciate that. But there were major stories in this morning's press, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Hill, all stories about what Mr. Cohen is going to be saying tomorrow when he comes in front of this committee to testify. And I was just curious when the majority, when the chairman thought that the minority might have access to Mr. Cohen's opening statement.
We don't have it, and as soon as we have it, we'll get it to you. We don't have it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you convening this business meeting so that all members of the committee may have the opportunity to engage in a dialogue about the necessity of issuing 3 subpoenas, the first subpoenas of the 116th Congress. It shows me you meant what you said at our January organizational meeting when you committed to holding votes on subpoenas, and I appreciate you keeping this commitment. We are here to vote on whether to compel documents from the Departments of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, and the Justice Department relating to the status of family separations at the border. My understanding is that all 3 departments have been cooperating with your request, Mr. Chairman, so I was surprised when I learned you wanted to issue these subpoenas. The decision to issue subpoenas so quickly, Mr. Chairman, is, I believe, a rash decision. It is a hasty decision. It's a decision that will have negative consequences for the committee. Your decision will disincentivize entities from providing documents on a voluntary basis. They will just wait now for the inevitable subpoena. Let's be clear on the timeline here. You became chairman on January 3rd of this year, less than 2 months ago. The committee didn't organize until January 29th, less than a month ago. And on February 5th, you sent letters to the top legislative liaisons at these 3 respective agencies. You asked for document production schedule just 3 weeks ago. Since then, each of the agencies, DHS, DOJ, and HHS, have engaged in several calls, face-to-face meetings with bipartisan committee staff. These agencies have engaged in good faith and continued efforts to accommodate your request. For example, it's my understanding that DOJ and HHS offered in-camera reviews for an immediate review of the information responsive to your request. You could have already seen what you're asking for. I also understand representatives from DHS had a bipartisan staff briefing in which they discussed the scope of your request to ensure an efficient production. Your staff agreed to review a data portal at HHS, but had to be rescheduled because the Federal Government was closed last Monday in honor of President's Day, and then again on Wednesday due to the weather. Despite those office closures, HHS produced nearly 800 pages of documents to demonstrate their intent to voluntarily comply with your request. Just last night, DHS produced 2,700 pages, right here, 2,700 pages of documents, also responsive to your request. Mr. Chairman, have you reviewed any of these documents? Have you even had time to review them? As you well know, the congressional oversight process takes time. We shouldn't rush to compel documents from the departments, especially when they're already complying with your request voluntarily. I worry the reason you are moving so fast here is because you are in a race. Looks to me the Democrats are eager to attack President Trump and this administration, and you didn't want to lay the groundwork. You just wanted to be first. Only a few weeks ago, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce held a hearing on this very topic. And in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the House Judiciary Committee is having a hearing on the administration's family separation policy with department officials from all 3 of the agencies just next door planning to testify. If you'd like to go over for that hearing, Mr. Chairman, I got to go over for it. You're welcome to come. Why is it that you want to hastily issue subpoenas? Maybe you want to be the first committee to issue a subpoena against this administration. Why not have a hearing first? Why not reschedule the document production hearing you postponed from 2 weeks ago? This does not seem like a fair and responsible oversight, and what worries me is that it seems to me like we're trending in the wrong direction. Tomorrow morning in this very room, you will give a megaphone to a self-admitted liar as your star witness. This is a man who has pleaded guilty to crimes of deception and fraud. Not my words. Read the sentencing memo from the Southern District of New York. You don't care about Michael Cohen's credibility issues because you want to use him to attack the president. You don't care if DHS, DOJ, HSS are voluntarily complying with your request. You want to attack the president's administration. So what's your next step here, Mr. Chairman? Are you going to hold a contempt vote in 2 weeks if the departments don't comply quickly enough for you? Or are you going to file a lawsuit in federal court? At the end of the day, we must provide the departments with sufficient time. You've given them 3 weeks. Now look, I'll be the first to admit, when agencies do drag their feet, when they stonewall us, like we experienced during the Obama administration, I understand that then there's a frustration and you want to get the documents. But by jumping to a subpoena after just 3 weeks of talking with the agencies, I think you're setting a bad precedent for this committee. I strongly urge you to reconsider your approach here, and I'll just add one more thing. There is something we could be doing instead of this business meeting, and Mr. Meadows and I have asked you to do this. We could be marking up H.R. 1, the Democrats' legislation to make fundamental changes to our election, campaign finance, and ethics laws. We've heard H.R. 1 may be on the floor next week, and we haven't even had a markup. All members are here. If H.R. 1 is so darn important, your first piece of legislation, why aren't we here marking it up? Mr. Chairman, you've spoken often about the importance of finding consensus and common ground. You've appealed to our better angels. You said we must have our own North Star. We need to put the integrity of the committee on higher ground. The subpoenas you are pushing forward today, I think, are premature, counterproductive, and unnecessary. After all, these agencies are already complying with your requests voluntarily. If you insist on proceeding, I will urge our members to vote against this resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I want to thank the ranking member for his statement. Let me be clear so that the members of the committee are clear. The documents, the subpoena, the documents we were requesting are identical to the bipartisan request we made in July. So I will refer you to my statement. Any other discussion? My opening statement. Yes, sir, Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a 3-page list of communications between our committee staff and agency staff with DOJ, DHS, HSS, and others I'd like to enter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. Chairman, let me just observe, I must say what I just heard gives chutzpah a whole new definition of meaning. Premature. Rushing to judgment. I don't ever remember the distinguished ranking member objecting to a single issuance of a subpoena when the Republicans were in charge. Not one, no matter how frivolous or how punitive they might have been. And in this case, we are talking about the separation of children, hundreds of children from their families. And as the distinguished chairman indicated, it's rushed to judgment. This request has been made since July of last year.
Gentleman yield.
Maybe the distinguished ranking member thinks it's okay, I don't know, for children to be in that kind of limbo that long rather than inconvenience the executive branch
When the gentleman
for the
yields.
issuance of documents that are necessary for this committee's inquiry and action. I believe the time is long past due for us to take action,
Would the
to
gentleman
stop the
yield?
dilatory tactics, and frankly, acknowledge that this committee didn't do its job in the last 2 years, and we've got a lot of catch-up to do now. And I'm proud to support the motion. And yes, I will yield to my friend from Ohio.
A partisan request 3 weeks ago is different than a bipartisan request for different information 7 months ago. That's the point. 3 weeks ago, February 5th, was the official request sent to these 3 agencies. Now, if you think 3 weeks is adequate time to do our oversight duties, that's fine.
Reclaiming my time.
You want to issue a
reclaiming
subpoena,
my
that's fine.
time.
Obviously, you do. That's what's happening.
Excuse me. I'm reclaiming my time, Mr. Ranking Member.
I understand.
Rules of committee. That's the same request. Nice try. It's the same request.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Did Mr. Meadows sign this one?
Hey, excuse me, the gentleman from Virginia has the time.
I thank the chair.
Would the gentleman yield for 1 second?
Of course.
I want the gentleman to understand that the information that we got has not one name, not one number. Zilch. All right? Just want you to be. I yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the chair. I mean, we could go on and on about the numbers involved. They're staggering and they're stunning. Hundreds of children forced into institutions or foster care or separated from their families or guardians by hundreds of miles. The trauma of that is something that disgusted the American public, rightfully so. And if this committee can't at least start on that basis of trying to find common ground in protecting children, I don't know what we can. But I applaud the chairman and our staff for making this the first item of subpoena business, because it ought to be the protection of children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start off maybe on a little different tone and express my appreciation for the fact that we're actually having this debate. I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, you and I have worked in a bipartisan way, and you've now referred to my letter more times than I would like, but at the same time, I recognize that this is indeed an important issue, and you and I know that that is an important issue. So I want to thank the chairman for his willingness to have this real debate on an issue that is as important as issuing a subpoena. I do want to highlight that we are now going to, as soon as this resolution passes, if we go forward with it, we will have now issued the same number of subpoenas that we did in the entire last Congress. And to be overzealous in our issuing of subpoenas, I want to caution that we need to be efficient and effective. To quote my good friend, I have an issue that I can't imagine. Here's half of the documents that the committee got last night. We got the other half over here. I can't imagine that we have thoroughly gone through all of these documents to make a real decision on whether DHS has complied. And I'll let the gentleman whisper in your ear so you can.
No, you go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. There is no way that even with your learned and capable staff that they have been able to go through the 2,500 pages in detail unless they've taken Evelyn Wood's speed reading course. I mean, I can just tell you, there's just no way for them to do that. And for us to move forward with a subpoena, when I am reaffirming today my bipartisan support of the chairman in this very important issue, I think that we need to go beyond where we are. The Obama administration raised this as an issue because of Flores. They said that they had a number of concerns with child separation under the Obama administration. So I believe if we're going to subpoena, let's go ahead and subpoena records and witnesses from the previous administration as well. If it's all about the children, let's make sure it's all about the children. And you know that I have a special place in my heart to making sure that these kids are reunited with their parents if any child is left behind, that we need to make sure that in a bipartisan way we act for support here. So I want to just, yeah, the gentleman will yield to my good friend from Virginia. Is that who was?
I thank my friend. I just wanted, for the record, because he raises a legitimate point, was there a time to go through the documents we've been provided? I am informed. In fact, one of our staff members most certainly did, and that it was an easier task than it might seem, given the volume you showed, because there were so many redactions, including especially names.
Well,
I thank my friend for
well, reclaiming my time, again, we have suggested that we will not go over staff, go after staff. I can just tell you, having gone through tens of thousands of documents that have been redacted from DOJ that there simply is not enough time to have a credible answer to whether this is responsive or not. And so I appreciate the gentleman's response, and I appreciate what the committee is saying. But I can just tell you that it is not credible for us today to suggest that these are not responsive. Now, that being said, let me move on to one other topic in the very short time that I have remaining. I am concerned, Mr. Chairman, that we are taking attack on very important issues that become very partisan very quickly. This is an issue that does not need to be partisan. When you raised this issue, when you were in the ranking member's position, I think your comment was there was not a single Republican willing to stand up and stand with you, and I reached out to you at that particular point. I will continue to do that. But let's be serious and be all-inclusive. And if there are in-camera documents that can be reviewed today, let's adjourn this meeting and go look at the in-camera documents and start working in a serious manner on that. Lastly, the scope of the hearing that is coming up tomorrow, Mr. Chairman, I've been advised that it was an intentional decision to leave the minority out of that scope decision on what was to be included, and that DOJ raised that issue, and that this committee decided to keep the minority from being involved in the scope. And we're better than that, Mr. Chairman, to use your words. We're better than that, and if we're going to talk about scope and transparency, let's do it in a bipartisan way, and I'm committed to doing that, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me just say to the committee, a number of you, and like half of you, have asked me to try to get out of here because you got other hearings. I'm just telling you, and I'm trying to. That's why we held it at 9:30. But I will hear Mr. Clay, I think.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter in the record letter delivered to our office last night from DHS and one to your office last night from the Department of Homeland Security.
Without objection, so ordered. All right. Who? Katie Hill? Ms. Hill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that were said. And the first is that an in-camera and in-person desire or suggestion to review the data is impossible when we're asking for the names of thousands of children who have been separated from their families so that we can try to reunite them. I mean, to me, this seems like a simple request. And the fact that we were given thousands of pages of documentation that is, frankly, irrelevant and not actually the names and the information that was requested shows to me that either they don't have the information or they are trying to avoid giving us this. And I think that there are a lot of questions around why that is the case. But the most important thing that I wanted to say is that I worked in the services profession previously, the social services profession, and I saw every single day the trauma that kids who are separated from their families in foster care went through. And so to say that we're not giving enough time when these kids have been separated for months and months on end, every single day that passes is another drastic contribution to the trauma that they are dealing with. This is trauma that will last a lifetime, and to pretend that there is anything other than the utmost urgency, we shouldn't have even had to wait for 3 weeks, let alone 7 months, 8 months. This is something that should have happened the next day. And frankly, we can't talk about more time. We need to be doing this right now. Thank you.
So that anybody else? If the committee has already agreed by unanimous consent to make an amendment, what? Just read that. That's okay. Instructions. Who's that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Listen, I just want to express my disappointment in this request for the subpoenas as well, without going through the process. I mean, we've only been here, as has been stated, a couple of months, and I mean, I recall several times, Mr. Chairman, you coming down hard on former chairmen for their use of subpoenas. And I just can't wrap my mind around the fact that we've only been here a few weeks and we somehow expect these departments to produce documents like this so rapidly. And we didn't even organize till less than a month ago as a committee ourselves. And as you mentioned, some of the request was actually from last Congress. Well, I know there were times that we didn't even get a phone call. Excuse me. We didn't even get a phone call from the Obama administration for months, let alone get documents produced, and still we didn't send a subpoena. It just seems to me that there's, it takes time to do congressional oversight and investigative work, and it's not as though these departments just have documents sitting around with a bow wrapped around them, ready to go at a moment's notice. I think to do effective oversight that we are required to do means that we try to work with these agencies and departments that obviously, as is sitting right here beside me, they've been cooperating. And is this what they get for trying to cooperate? A subpoena request? I just think we're going way too fast for this. I think it's setting a very bad precedent. It appears as though we're going to head full steam down this direction, but I do think it's a dangerous path, and I think I yield back.
Thank you very much. With all due respect to the gentleman, let me be clear. I got to tell you, I'm listening to this, and you will never convince me that we have not been over and above reasonable. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of surprised. Ms. Hill, I think, said it quite eloquently. Children have been snatched away from their parents. Come on now. They've been snatched away from their parents. We requested stuff 7 back in July. We get ready to hit on our 1-year anniversary. These are children. And so I did not think this would be that complicated, but obviously it is. Ms. Salib. Ms. Salib, do you have something to say?
Thank you so much, Chairman. I really applaud us being able to bring this forward because this is something that, for me as a mother, I just can't imagine. There's not an R or a D next to any of that child, any of those children that are in detention camps right now. And Mr. Chairman, you're right. This is something that should be a nonpartisan issue. All we want to know is where the children are, where their parents are, and unite them and make sure that we stop the trauma because they're our children, Mr. Chairman, because they're in our custody. And watching not only my colleagues come from seeing a detention camp just this past week and telling me as a child turns 18 while they're in these camps, they shackle them at the legs and put them into prisons and jails with criminals. I just don't understand why they keep putting up the stacks, Mr. Chairman, as if in there is the information that we requested not only in July but now. But we're being transparent by issuing the subpoena. This should never, ever be a partisan issue. These are children. These are innocent children. Any of those children, and sometimes it's hard for me, I think to myself, if they were Canadians, would we still be talking about it this way? And because they're brown and because they're from countries that are very poor. And maybe many colleagues may be feeling like that's not the case, but I feel truly in my gut and my feeling that if this was people and children from different other countries, that we would not be discussing this in this way, discussing it as if it's some sort of political strategy. These are children. We could be doing anything else and talking about anything at the forefront of making it a partisan issue, but these are, again, innocent children that have been separated from their parents up to 9 months. And I just don't understand why my colleagues, because 10 years down the line, you're going to look at this time, this moment. These children are going to be 15, 16. They're going to remember the experience they had in our country, what we did to them. They're going to remember, and they're going to come to us, and an apology is not going to be acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to comment about all the righteous indignation we're hearing here. As I recall, the images that were used in the press last year were actually of children caged was actually from the Obama administration. I recall those children being put there during the previous administration, but interestingly enough, our document request is only during this administration. If you want to help reunite, let's take those names all the way back to when this process started. If this is about uniting children, and it really is about that, let's take those dates back and look back then and get those names too. I yield.
Yeah. I need names.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being courageous enough to hold this important gathering. And let me candidly say that in the interest of bipartisan spirit, I think we all should take a deep breath and ask ourselves, truly, what do we recognize? It's been brought up by my colleagues that we should look into the separation of children from the last two administrations, including President Trump's administration and President Obama's administration. I concur. I also recognize the fact that the authority of the chairman, having been established in the 116th Congress, is variant from his authority as a ranking member in the 115th Congress, and thus the timeline, although it exists on a calendar, is different. The request is different, and we should give these cooperating agencies time to comply with these complex requests. Further, I ask my colleagues to recognize the numbers here. We're talking about allegedly less than 3,000 children that have been separated from their families, from their parents. Would any of us disagree that these children were separated from their parents who were in the process of committing a crime on American soil by entering our country illegally? Are we a nation of law and order or not? And let me remind all my colleagues that as we sit here today, there are 800,000 American citizens incarcerated, parents of minor children. They've been separated from their children by their criminal act. So I strongly recommend to all viewing, if you intend to not be separated from your child, commit thee not a crime upon American soil. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to address a couple of things, but one is we need to recognize, and I hope that this committee recognizes, that this issue is beyond partisanship. And that means that our urgency should be beyond partisanship as well. This issue, we had reporting as of almost a year ago, last June, CNN, at one facility, children recounted being held down for forcible injections, which medical records show are powerful antipsychotics and sedatives. There is reported evidence that children are being drugged in these facilities starting a year ago. We submitted a request in the last Congress, and it was not just the Democratic ranking member that was disrespected. It was the Republican chair of this committee requesting these files that was disrespected with DHS and HHS and agency reluctance to hand over these papers. We are a co-equal branch of government. In camera is not good enough. We are a co-equal branch, and the executive branch does not reside above us. They reside alongside us, and they govern alongside us. I find the insinuation that the chairman is in a political race to be the first to address this issue insulting. It is insulting. I've been here for a very short period of time, and I find that the chairman's conduct and leadership of this committee to be, frankly, unimpeachable. He is fair. And I think it's outrageous to think that this is a political race. What we are in is a race against time. I don't care if it was one child separated from their parent. That is an international human rights violation. And the fact that this nation has potentially committed 3,000 of those, and each day is a violation, tens of thousands of human rights violations, and we want to delay. So I invite all of the colleagues who do believe in delaying to go on the record in doing so, because this is outrageous.
Will my colleague yield? Will my colleague yield?
No, because I got more to
Madam.
go. I think that again, this reflects a bipartisan request. And we should also, when we talk about being a nation of laws, it is not simply because one person violates a law that gives us the right to violate their human rights. That is an outrageous basis for our nation's actions. No person, no state, no government, no individual reserves the right to violate another person's, another being's human right. We are creating generational trauma for which we will have to answer for decades from now. And this is different. A zero-tolerance policy from this present administration is different than a previous administration's policy, first of all. And second of all, this is truly beyond. It is beyond. Because the idea that the only thing that's making this a partisan issue is the fact that one party wants to delay reunifying children with their parents. That's what's making it partisan. But it's not because the issue itself is partisan. And we can no longer hide behind the bureaucratic delay of the administration. The idea that these agencies are operating in good faith when they drop over 2,000 documents hours before we're supposed to convene our committee today does not look like good faith operation to me. It does not, particularly when none of those documents address the separation of parents, the potential health violation, the injections of antipsychotic drugs that we are seeing that are being reported by CNN. I mean, this is beyond. I understand partisan issues, and I understand wanting to delay other procedural disagreements and other procedures of this committee, but I just think that this should not be partisan. The delay should not be partisan. The urgency should be within each and every single one of us who has a child, cares about children, which I imagine is every member of this committee. I yield back to the chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing. Let me just add to what's already been said. If this is not a partisan issue, if this is really about the children, and it is a serious issue of reuniting children with families, then let's go back and get the children's names, get the information from the Obama administration. If this is really not about partisanship, and if this is about saving the children, let's get all the documents, and let's review them. The stack that Mr. Meadows held up, who has gone through those to see that is not what has been asked for? All we're saying is, if this is what it's intended to be, get all of them, the previous administration included. It's children, regardless of whether it's under the Obama administration or under President Trump. So let's don't say that it's not partisan. It is partisan for what this has been asked for. So let's not just say one thing and do another. I yield back.
Hearing no further debate. Ms. Presley.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your composure, the civility and fairness that you model in the face of tactical diversions and partisan gamesmanship, when all we are simply trying to do is to collect the data to unify, restore, and to preserve families. It should not be a radical notion to lift up the preservation of families and to mitigate the trauma and hurt that has been caused by this administration. Mr. Chairman, throughout our time on this committee, you have said that we are here to effectively and efficiently seek the truth, transparency, and the pursuit of justice. I fear and I feel a little shame that we have young people here today, and the debate here and some of what I've heard from across the aisle, I think tarnishes this august body and the work of this committee, because this is not a partisan issue. We are here to seek the truth, to seek transparency in the pursuit of justice, and we should be doing exactly that. These children are not disposable, and although it is easy to get caught up in making this simply about a data request, the best advice that we received in new member orientation was to never forget the plot, and the plot is the people. And we are devastating people decimating whole communities with the separation of families. We need to move with urgency now. And again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your leadership in pursuit of that.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a very clear distinction between what happened in the Obama administration and what's happening in the Trump administration. In the Obama administration, when there were limited separations, it was due to trafficking and a clear showing that there was trafficking there or a clear inability to establish a family relationship. In the Trump administration, that policy was reversed, and it was zero tolerance, and it was intentional cruelty. Let's just be very clear, because people like Stephen Miller said we have to be cruel to disincentivize people from coming in. So the moral equivalence between the Trump administration and the Obama administration is just factually incorrect. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Thank you very much. Let me say to the committee, I am very, very proud of you for the civility that you've displayed in a very apparent that has become a difficult issue. And I really appreciate all of your comments. Hearing no further debate, the question is on agreeing to the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I demand a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested on the question of agreeing to the resolution. Is there a sufficient second? There being a sufficient second, the question occurs on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Cummings. The clerk shall call the roll.
Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Cummings votes yes. Ms. Maloney? Ms. Norton? Ms. Norton votes yes. Mr. Clay? Mr. Clay votes yes. Mr. Lynch? Mr. Lynch votes yes. Mr. Cooper?
Aye.
Mr. Cooper votes yes. Mr. Connolly?
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes yes. Mr. Krishnamurthy?
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes yes. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes yes. Mr. Ruda? Mr. Ruda votes yes. Ms. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Hill votes yes. Ms. Wasserman Schultz? Mr. Sarbanes? Mr. Sarbanes votes yes. Mr. Welch? Mr. Welch votes yes. Ms. Spear? Ms. Spear votes yes. Ms. Kelly? Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier votes yes. Ms. Lawrence? Ms. Plaskett?
Yes.
Ms. Plaskett votes yes. Mr. Khanna? Mr. Khanna votes yes. Mr. Gomez? Mr. Gomez votes yes. Ms. Acacia-Cortez? Ms. Acacia-Cortez votes yes. Ms. Presley? Ms. Presley votes yes. Ms. Tlaib? Ms. Tlaib votes yes. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Amash? Mr. Amash votes yes. Mr. Gosar? Ms. Fox? Mr. Massey? Mr. Meadows? Mr. Heiss? Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman? Mr. Comer? Mr. Comer votes no. Mr. Cloud? Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Gibbs? Mr. Higgins? Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes yes. Ms. Miller? Ms. Miller votes no. Mr. Green? Mr. Green votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes no.
Are there any members who wish to vote?
Ms. Maloney is not recorded.
Yes.
Ms. Maloney votes yes.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz? Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes yes. Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes no.
there any other member wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote?
Ms. Lawrence? Ms. Lawrence votes yes.
Yeah. The clerk shall report the vote.
On this vote, we have 25 yeas and 11 noes.
On this vote, very good. The resolution is agreed to. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. There being no further business, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
See, buddy. Oh, good. So we'll pretend I am. We're working on dates right now. Awesome.